Alright guys, welcome to the poison pawn series. Some might consider it as pawn break. A poison pawn is actually a pawn that if your opponent captures, it leads to his loss of material or a very good position for you. So a poison pawn can also be called a pawn break depending on the position. And I'll show you love this video as it contains crazy and interesting pawn breaks. So to pause the video to try and find it out. And please, we are still a small growing YouTube channel. So please help us like, help us share, help us subscribe. C6, black plays B6 and you capture, and this pawn is definitely a passed pawn. Black has little or nothing he can do, and this pawn is definitely a passed pawn. Now, what if black actually captures on C6? Then we proceed to capture his pawn on A6, and this pawn has already gone through, as there is nothing really stopping it from making a queen. Please, I will encourage you to pause the video and try and find out the best move, as it will help you and make you a better chess player. Now, as this position looks hopeless for white, he has 2 pawns, black has 3 pawns, and to crown it all, pawn structure is really not encouraging. Like if it was black to play, black would definitely play G6, and this position is easy for white. But unfortunately, it's white to play, and he has to find a killer move. Obviously, this doesn't work because he can simply capture the pawn, and you still have a pass a pawn threatening to promote. It's definitely not the move, and that is where white comes up with this brilliant plan. G6. Obviously, black can see that if you take with your H pawn, then definitely white will push, and there's no stopping this white pawn. Black decides to ignore the pawn push and capture with his H pawn. And the moment he does that, you do not push your pawn 1 square forward, as the king is in the square to pick up the pawn, but you capture the H pawn and the king is not in the square. Now, let me know if you want me to do a video about the rule of the square. This will stop you from losing a lot of end games. Now, the pawn break in this position is kind of cool, kind of nice. Yeah, pause the video to find out the pawn break. And the pawn break is, C5. If black does nothing about this, definitely this pawn is a passed pawn. If black takes the pawn, then the B pawn goes through and there is no stopping it. A quick question here. In this position, we play A7 or E3. Then you fell for the trick, as you can visualize here that you will promote almost the same time as black, but black's promotion comes with a check to your king, and thereby you have passed over the tempo to him. And not even mention that you have only 1 pawn and black has 2 pawns. So it's important that you play E3 in this position and be in time to stop the pawn. And if you are thinking of pushing your pawn to B5, you can simply ignore the pawn push and push your own pawn, and this pawn, the king is always in time to stop the pawn push. So it leaves us with one other option, which is king to E6. And yes, you can fake, and I can come closer with my king. I'm in time to stop the pawn, but this pawn turns out to be a pain in black's neck, as he can simply push this pawn 1 square forward. Yes, he can push and he's in time to stop the pawn, but then you have created this. The king must always be on either the A1 square or the B2 square to keep an eye on the pawns, and then your king has the leverage of going around and picking up all the pawns. And eventually, you can promote with your G pawn once the king has picked up all your pawns. How you can agree with me that this C5 move is pretty amazing? If you think people showing you brilliant moves are amazing, think of how amazing it will be when you can find the brilliant move yourself. So furthermore, I encourage you to pause the video and try and find out the best move. The 4th on our list, and this exercise is pretty amazing. G4. Yes, when he takes, you push your pawn, he captures back, and you can notice that this H pawn is in time to promote because black's king is not in the square. But let's back off. What if he just moved the king, threatening to push his own pawn? Then you can even push F5, threatening to capture either way. Anyway, he captures is fine because you capture the opposite and you are good to go. Yo, pawn break 5, and this was actually pretty amazing. Then pause the video if you want to find out. It's so amazing that I have to rush into it. The begins of B4, If he captures You can simply push your C pawn forward, and no matter whether he captures or takes, you push your A pawn, and your A pawn is a passer. What if he doesn't capture and he, comes closer with his king? You don't capture his pawn on C3, but rather you push your A pawn. Regardless of whether he takes or pushes, can simply capture back, and this is a pass pawn. And this exercise I love so much, seen it a couple of times. And the idea behind this pawn break is sacrifice all your pawns. Sacrifice the first one. If he doesn't take, it's already a passer, so he must definitely take. When he takes, you sacrifice yet another pawn. You must take, because if he does something like this, you can simply not push the pawn, as the king is in time to capture it. He will capture his own pawn, and this pawn is equally a passer. The only defense against f4 is, king to e6. The capture threatening to promote. The king must come close. You defend your pawn on g7, with pawn to h6. And you can see how miserable the life of white's king is. You can simply buy time, and the moment he goes back, you push and he captures back. Don't make the error of capturing back, as this is a draw, but rather you sacrifice that pawn, move one square forward, and the black king now has an escape route. And the moment he uses that escape route, you take over d5 and you promote your piece. How amazing is this particular? This exercise will actually be easier to spot. Some might say in c4 preparing d5, but then it's just a waste of the tempo. You can instantly sacrifice a c pawn, and you think and you build up, and there is no stopping of this pawn, and this pawn is obviously a passer, as white's king is in time to stop and capture. The more we go in this puzzle, the crazier it becomes, as this one is the craziest of them all. Yes, you might see the beginning before, but then is the ending that will actually shock you. You push c5. If he moves his king, then he can capture, and he captures back. He's a passer, and his king is not in time to stop your pawn. After I push c5, he can't move with his king, so you must definitely capture, as he can't ignore it either. When he captures, you play b6, and there is no stopping of this pawn. Yes, black has 5 pawns, but then you make a queen. Pause the video and try and find out this pawn break. If he said b6, he spotted the idea, but he got it all wrong, because black can simply move a step backwards. If he captures, he's in time to stop your pawn from promoting. Better still, he can capture and you try to push this trick, and he can simply be in time to stop your pawn from promoting. So in this position, the move is not d6 but a6, threatening to push b6 and take a7. So you must quickly react it, as this proves fatal, as you can simply push b6 either way, and no matter what it does, this pawn is a passer. Now the last on our list is pretty technical and interesting, if not crazy. g5 is not a pawn break, but is the preparation for the pawn break. As you see, the king on g8 cannot move away from the pawn on h7, as it protects it. So the king on g8 must stick around to the pawn on h7. It gives us our motive for attack. We play g5, threatening to mate the king, not immediately, but in a couple of moves. He must move back, protecting his h7 pawn, and then we cause the pawn break. g5 has a strong purpose, and the purpose of g5 is that when the pawn d5 promotes, it doesn't come with a check, and thereby we can promote and checkmate black's king. I'll show you in a few moves. Push, push, push. He queens first, but his own queen doesn't come with a check. His own queen doesn't come with a check, but ours comes with a check and mate. That's it, guys. Thank you very much. Please like, please share, please subscribe. Thank you.